Keepin' It Green. I'm your host, Debbie Klughers, and today I have with me Miss Lorna Salzman. She's an environmentalist, an educator, an activist, a writer, a scientist, I'm sure, to some degree.
A scientist without the degree.
There you go. What else can you tell the viewers to introduce yourself to them, Lorna?
Well, my background is as an environmentalist, but it's been a career of 4 decades, of 40 years. And I started out as a complete novice. I remember when I went to the founding meeting of Friends of the Earth, which I worked for about a dozen years. This was in 1971. And
what is Friends of the Earth?
Well, Friends of the Earth, it's now a small policy organization in Washington. But at one point, it was one of the major national membership organizations under the leadership of the late Dave Brower, who was the tremendous inspiration for me personally, but for thousands of other people. I mean, he defined 20th century environmentalism.
Wow.
And he was quite a remarkable person. And I wish we had him around now because his leadership and his vision they were tremendous. But I remember going to it was the meeting of their incorporation in New York, even though they were a California group. And it was up near the UN, and I went to this meeting, and there were all these people, and they were talking about all these issues, and I had never been to anything like this before, and I sat there in total awe, in stunned silence, and after the meeting was over, I crept away. I was so afraid of talking to these people that knew so much, and I knew nothing. I was completely intimidated. And of course, my friends now would be very surprised to hear that.
And they sparked your fire.
And that, well, not that meeting, but shortly after, people in New York formed a New York branch of volunteers. And so I went in and volunteered for them. And I did it regularly at my husband's insistence. He said, well, if you really like it so much, you should go in, a few times a week, not just once. So I started going in regularly and learning the ropes.
And what did they do? What was their focus?
Well, it was lobbying and legislation, but also public education. Great. It was whatever, whatever was needed. They did litigation, they did research, and they had many, many projects. But I was just working as a volunteer with the branch, so, I'd be writing letters, making phone calls, answering members, So I literally learned from scratch. And then I started to become familiar with issues. They had a wonderful newspaper called Not Man Apart, which was one of the big factors in changing my life, along with the Blueprint for Survival, which the Ecologists published in the UK in 1972. So those two things really were what stimulated me to. And
were you the editor of one of those, or was that a different
I was not.
newspaper?
No, of neither. The Ecologist was published by Edward Goldsmith, or Teddy Goldsmith, who just died a few years ago. A quite wonderful person and a great magazine. The Not Man Apart was edited by a wonderful guy, Tom Turner, who now works for the Sierra Club. And it was the best environmental publication of its time. It was, because all the stories, they were in depth, they were factual, they were authoritative, but no polemics, just the facts. And I was so impressed with this newspaper. I just thought it was the best thing that I had come across in my entire life. And I said, my only desire is to write for this newspaper. Okay, so I sent in an article about a proposed bridge, which predates your time. It was supposed to go from Rye in New York to Oyster Bay across Long Island Sound. And I had read up on this very controversial bridge. And so I wrote up a very long article called The Unsound Bridge from Rye to Oyster Bay, and Not Man Apart published it. And I was just celebrating, with the champagne, because I was so delighted to be published in this incredible newspaper. Anyway, after...
That was Moses? Was he?
That was Moses. Right. You bet it was.
Yeah,
and Rockefeller.
I learned about
absolutely,
this, yeah.
Absolutely. And the bridge they ultimately defeated.
Right.
And, but anyway, after further working with the New York branch on issues, a friend of mine, Tom Stokes, who lives up in Lenox, Mass., was quite friendly with Dave Brower and worked for the foundation, which was the 501c3 branch of Friends of the Earth. And and we became very friendly, and he saw how enthusiastic I was, and so he said to Dave Brower, "You really ought to hire her as a national staff person."
Wonderful.
And Brower did for $6,000 a year, with the proviso that I could spend my summers out in East Quogue.
There you go, which you still do
Which
today.
I still do, and work on issues out there, which I did.
Good. Are there any publications today that rival or can hold?
No, absolutely not. I would say the best publication of the non-scientific for the general public, which isn't purely environmental, but which has the best and most accurate writing, is Mother Jones.
Okay.
It didn't used to be. Mother Jones, it changed radically. It used to be just a sort of counterculture, and then they started taking environment seriously, and so they have very good writers. So right now, I think that's probably the best bet. However, after Dave Brower, who later on was thrown out of Friends of the Earth because he was too uncompromising, shortly after I was fired. I was
going to ask you, did you get thrown out?
Political battle. It was heavy. In the Washington office, it was really sort of the takeover of the managerial elite, the technocrats in the Washington office. It's on my website, and people can check it out.
What's your website address?
It's lornasalzman.com.
Okay, pretty easy.
And the history of the decline and fall of Friends of the Earth was very, very sad. But anyway, after the Washington office started, they closed the San Francisco office, they fired the field reps. I was the first one fired. And then Dave Brower was fired by his own board. But he went on, like he did when he had been fired from the Sierra Club, he went on to found Earth Island Institute. And that's an excellent, completely environmental publication, and it's published out of their office in San Francisco.
Okay,
and Earth Island Journal, I would say, is also excellent. It's up there with Mother Jones.
Very good.
So that.
So after that, what was your next step on your?
So after that, I got into
march.
I worked briefly for National Audubon Society on their American Birds magazine. I was totally bored. Left there, worked for Food and Water, fighting food irradiation, and then in the 1990s, for a few years, I was with the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, working on coastal zone issues, mainly on Staten Island, and I did that for 3 years.
Talk about irradiation. You also were integral in stopping the Shoreham nuclear power plant.
I was part of it. I initiated the Shoreham Opponents Coalition. I didn't direct it. Nora Bredis, who very sadly just died recently, she was only 62.
Wow.
She was the director of it and really did a superb job. So nuclear power was definitely one of my major issues in that whole time at Friends of the Earth.
And you did I'm thanking you for informing me of so many of the issues when we had that Japanese disaster. You were always sending a lot of really good informative articles, and thank you for that.
Yeah, well, I've done a lot of writing
Yes.
on nuclear issues and radioactive waste, and that was, but it wasn't the only thing I was interested in. I was very much interested in habitat and wilderness, and I became involved with the Long Island Pine Barrens Society, and also with the Nature Conservancy and other groups. I and my husband were, we were instrumental in saving some key habitats in Suffolk County.
Very good. So you're not just a second homeowner out here. You are involved.
No, well, I was. Now I'm a little less active, but I was for many years. And Maple Swamp in Flanders was my husband and my big find, and that led eventually to it being bought by the county. And the other was Swan Pond in Calverton, which were headwaters of the Peconic River. And when I was at Friends of the Earth, I got involved legally with the Army Corps, and we stopped the second golf course that would have destroyed Swan Pond, so which is now a preserve. It's now the Robert Cushman Murphy Preserve. So I'm very proud of those two things.
Good.
But I think you can see sort of where I'm leading now, because it was both politics and science. Right. And I always had a deep interest in natural history and science, and even I didn't study it in college, and maybe it was just as well, because I came to it myself with my own.
You're a Columbia graduate?
No, Cornell.
I'm sorry, Cornell.
Cornell, yeah. And my husband and I are birders, bird watchers, and mushroom hunters, and very, very much involved with natural history.
Okay.
A very basic love of that. But at the same time, because of the Friends of the Earth opportunity, I was obviously politically involved. So I was sort of shaping my own thought about politics and where environment was related to politics and vice versa. And so all these things sort of carried me along for a number of years. And then I don't exactly know when it happened, but I guess it was a natural outgrowth that when you're reading about science, you're reading about evolution.
Okay.
You're reading about biodiversity. You're reading about and you're trying to understand the place of humans in nature, and that's a subject that everyone talks about. That reinserting humanity in nature, the relationship, the spiritual relationship. For me, it's not so much spiritual. I mean, yes, it is in a sense spiritual, but there's a scientific basis. And one of the reasons I wrote this book was because I look around and I see the prevalence of ideology, secular and religious. And ideology is just a human concept. It's abstract. It's created, it's invented by the human mind, which doesn't give it objective reality. Doesn't mean that it may not be important, the individual spirituality and a feeling of relationship to nature. I would not oppose that or denigrate it. But it's not sufficient to deal with the crisis politically. One has to deal with the environmental crisis, such as global warming or nuclear power or the loss of biodiversity, which may be the most serious, actually. One has to have facts. One has to. It isn't just enough to get up with a signboard and say that spout your own philosophy and say save animals or save nature because it's the right thing to do, because it's morally right. I don't believe that can be the basis for a political movement, and we need a political movement.
Exactly, because we all know that every single person does have an effect, but we really need a much larger political movement.
But we need it based on the right thing.
Okay.
That's the point. It cannot be based on religion,
right,
for obvious reasons, because we have many religions and they all think they're right. So and we know that they're not. So that's but they're also secular ideologies. We've seen many in the past, and we still have them. We have the leftovers from communism and socialism. And we still have, and I've been very critical of the left, even though people think of me as being a radical leftist. In fact, I think I'm much more left than most of the left, but in a very, very different way, because I don't have an a priori ideology. I have my instincts as well as my research and my philosophy are based on facts, based on
science.
What you call non-arbitrary, because everything else is arbitrary. Religion is arbitrary, socialism is arbitrary, whatever, the Tea Party's arbitrary, the free market's arbitrary. Those are arbitrary. They're human invented, and if you don't defer to nature, to the laws of nature, and understanding particularly our origins, which tie us to nature, then we're controlled by despots. Whoever happens to be in power has control. So in a sense, the concept of
trying to control nature,
trying to control nature, but the point is it's a system imposed on nature. And in fact, if you think about it, and I discuss this in the final chapter or final essay of my book. If you think about it, all human systems, even the ones that we go along with, our political system, for example, or electoral system, our economic system, capitalism, these are arbitrary. They're human invented, and they're only valid as long as people
buy into them.
Obey them or believe in them, and if they don't, they can change them. But even whenever they make change, those are arbitrary. But what is the non-arbitrary system? Nature is the non-arbitrary system. Okay, because
it is. Nature
it is. Nature is the relationships of nature, not just the individual species, but the relationships,
Right.
the ecosystems, the
Exactly.
biotic communities, the symbiosis,
Take out
the
one of those
coevolution.
things and-
But they're non-arbitrary.
Right.
They're not only are they obviously interact and affect others, but the point is that they're based on science. They're based on empirical science, which is non-arbitrary, and it's something which is indisputable, unlike religion and unlike secular ideologies.
Now, what about some people that don't buy into your saying that science is indisputable? Some people don't believe the science that's clearly,
Well,
out
luckily
there
those
today.
people aren't scientists.
Right.
I mean, that's
right.
and the scientific community is under attack.
Right.
It's always been under attack. We have to understand, even in Darwin's,
Much more so today.
even in Darwin's day. I mean, Darwin was not the first one to propose these ideas
Right.
about humans arising from earlier life forms. I mean, he was one that
Linnaeus.
synthesized and put it together and found the evidence for it in his own experiments and research and so forth. But even today, and I have to say this because I've done a lot of reading on this, and particularly in the politics of evolution, and so we have skepticism of Darwin from all sides, left and right. Okay, and we have it and the left is more disturbing in some ways because the left is supposed to be concerned about human values, compassion, interdependence but unfortunately we've had in the universities, and this goes back to the 60s actually, and with a lot of foreign influences, we have the trend called postmodernism, which you've probably heard of. I don't mean the postmodern McMansions in the Hamptons, that's but something just as bad, actually. And postmodernism is famous because it says that everything is socially constructed, including truth, including science, particularly science. So there's been a reaction against science, not only from, say, the Tea Party and the fundamentalist Christians and the Muslims and so forth. There's come a backlash from the left. These people, the postmodernists, are very staunchly left and socialist, and so for them they put their stake in the notion, we've heard about the politics is political, the personal is political. You've heard about identity politics, where identity meaning, whatever you happen to think is right, and whatever you think is wrong because, and you know what you're talking about because you happen to be a Native American or an African American or whatever. So that's what's come out of postmodernism, a tremendous skepticism of science as a discipline, science as a profession, science as knowledge. That's all it is science as knowledge.
Sure.
But they've put a big dent in this. And of course,
Scary.
a very, very big dent. And it's really bad because if you add it on to people who are already into irrationalism. I mean, we have a major resurgence of irrationalism. We've had it a lot in 40 years, but it's really becoming conspiracy theories and beliefs in in all kinds of cults and mythologies and New Age stuff and so forth. So then all of a sudden, when you see academics, postmodern academics of the left, or who are secular, they're not religious, and you see them casting aspersions on evolution, natural selection, Darwin, people like Richard Dawkins and so forth, it only makes it worse. It only adds on to the suspicion of science.
Wow.
And so this is the situation that we have in this country. It's not limited to this country, but it's mostly this country, because this country has the honor, perhaps if that's the right word, of being the most religiously observant in the world, in Western civilization. I'm not going to talk about Islam, because obviously that's a very serious religion. But in this country, compared to Western Europe, religion exerts a far more powerful influence, and there's a tremendous percentage of people that don't even believe in evolution, for example.
Why don't we, politics as if evolution mattered. Tell me a little bit, the focus of the book, and it's a series of...
It's a series of essays, and what I try to do is explain how evolutionary concepts, and when I say evolution, I don't only mean evolution, but I also mean ecology, because ecology and evolution are two sides of the same coin. I mean, evolution deals with species, with their origins and their development. Ecology studies them in particular locations. And evolution and ecology is the interrelationships of species with each other and with the environment, and evolution. That's right, and which take place through the process of evolution. So those are the interconnections. So the essays are about both evolution and ecology. And what I've tried to show first of all, what I've just said to you, I've tried to stress the adverse influences on the study of evolution, the misconceptions about evolution and about Darwin. Darwin's blamed for everything, and the notion of nature red in tooth and claw, that natural selection is violence, and that the weaker or the unfit are eliminated, and all this kind of thing. And this is this is just pop nonsense. It's in the pop media because the pop media don't even bother to try to understand what these forces are. So I try to explain, the reality of what evolution and natural selection are.
Well, how can you explain that to some people that might not really understand what you're trying to get across?
Well, they have to try to understand. You have to, and you can do it at a very. You have to be open-minded, yes, of course, and you have to put aside your religious beliefs. And some people aren't ready to do that. Well, then don't even bother. I'm not. Let the scientists fight it out with the creationists. I have my final essay, or I should say my afterword, is controversial because I take a position which I deal with indirectly in the book. It isn't so much religion per se, but the religion, spirituality of individual belief systems, individual value systems as a totality. My afterword is a short statement why science and religion are incompatible. And
that's what I was just going to ask you. Yeah. Do you think that people can be devout and yet understand evolution?
Well, there's a very famous scientist with the National Institutes of Health, Francis Collins, who happens to be a devout Christian, but he's also a scientist and believes in evolution. I think this is a bit disingenuous, if not completely dishonest, because, as I say in the essay, the issue comes here about how life came into being, or the Earth, or the cosmos. Okay, there are two explanations. Okay, only one can be right. Okay, the first explanation is it came out through natural forces, through evolution, through the combining of molecules.
Or people have heard of the Big Bang Theory.
So, well, whatever.
Like
well, I'm not even going to talk about the origin. That's a whole other. I'm talking about as soon as there were the conditions for life and the elements that led to life, then enough time, and enough and variety and the force of natural selection all can explain completely and perfectly why life exists. In other words, there is a naturalistic, provable, demonstrably provable, empirically demonstrable, that can show why life persists and how it progresses. So, and so you don't need the concept of a creator. The other concept is that there was a creator that created everything, zap, and there it is. Okay, so you have two completely conflicting explanations, okay? Now, people have chosen one or they choose the other, but they both can't be correct. Right. Okay, either there was a creator or there wasn't. So it's not a issue. They're not compatible. You have to choose one or the other.
And science has recreated with certain, with some electricity and some water.
Well, they know what the conditions are for the initial forms of life, which were very primitive. And so those are the two choices you have. So when someone like Francis Collins, and there are other scientists who think they can be made compatible, but I don't think so when you pose the question that way and you say, either there's a creator or there isn't. Either there were natural forces or there was creative forces, and you can't have both at the same time. So that's why I think scientists like Collins are really, in a sense, living a lie. When they go into the
they're sitting on
laboratory,
the fence.
they go into, well, no, no, it's more than that. When they go into the laboratory, they have to make a choice.
Sure.
They have to believe that what they're seeing is not just that there was a god in the sky, whatever you want to call him, you know, Zeus or Apollo or Jehovah or something. You have to believe that there were natural forces and causes behind that. As a scientist, you can't be an honest scientist if you believe in those things. So I think it's very dishonest. Okay, that's and you have a lot of debate about this here, and you have. There's an institute called the Templeton Institute, which sponsors conferences and workshops, and it's even published books on this subject of the compatibility of science and religion. And there are some scientists who believe they are incompatible. Another one, Michael Ruse is another one. He's a very good evolutionary biologist. And I was in touch with him, and and I said, my book's coming out, and I think you're wrong. I think it's incompatible. He said, oh well, I'm anxious to see what you say. I don't know if he's so anxious yet. I haven't heard from him, but there are others. But I believe that it's you make your choice. But that doesn't, in a sense, that doesn't matter. As an individual, how you live your life, the way you live your life, you can make those choices. They don't affect other people, but when you're talking about politics, and you're talking about social policy, and you're talking about ethics and social justice, okay? It just can't be arbitrary. It can't just be what one person says, whether it's Marx or Jesus, which is, there was a French writer, Jean-François Revel, who wrote a book called Without Marx or Jesus. And you have to make your choices in the social and political arena. In your private life, you can do anything you want. If you want to go have your palm read, or you want to believe in astrology, there are more dangerous things, worse things than that. Have a good time. Be my guest. But when it comes to social policy and politics, and also education in the universities, then you have to deal with non-arbitrary things. And evolution and ecology, nature, are non-arbitrary. And that's, you have to be irrational.
It's not a debate.
It's not a debate.
Right.
It's not a debate. How you apply your knowledge is an ethical and social issue. And I deal, by the way, at some length in here with the issue of sociobiology. Now, the most famous practitioner or believer and writer in that is Richard Dawkins, who was a really brilliant evolutionary biologist. And then there's a man at Harvard named Steven Pinker, who's written a wonderful book called The Blank Slate. And what he does is demolish the people who have opposed sociobiology, which in fact happen to be the leftists.
Lorna, we're out of time, but fascinating stuff, and people can check out your blog spot.
Check out my website. The book is published by iUniverse. It's available through their website and other publishers. And my website is available, and I'm happy to have people get in touch with me and give me their comments.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Debbie.